Welcome into another episode of The Install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Greg, a little movement today, actual NFL news for us to start the podcast with. Baker Mayfield, the former number one overall pick by the Cleveland Browns, is going to start for, well, we don't know about starting, but he'll be in a Carolina Panthers uniform.
I would think he would start, but, what do we know right now, Buck? But I would think he'd be the starter.
It just makes me laugh. I don't know if you've seen that clip of Ben McAdoo, the offensive coordinator, accidentally letting it slip that they had planned to start Darnold for the season, and then coming back and telling reporters, I'm not supposed to say stuff like that anymore.
Right.
Forget that happened. But yeah, Baker's going to play for Carolina this year, and ironically enough, week 1 they got the Cleveland Browns at home.
Oh, they do. I didn't look at the schedule, so I did not know that. But that's interesting. It should be interesting because Matt Rule, he's obviously the head coach, and McAdoo is the coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
But Matt Rule wants to run the football. That's what he would like to do. He'd like to start his offense running the ball and work the pass game off of that. Now, again, you know me, Buck. I don't deal in the analytics per se. I don't know what the numbers exactly say, but I probably watched every snap of Baker Mayfield's in the NFL. And I watched a ton of him his last couple of years at Oklahoma. To me, just watching him play based on tape study, and I'm sure if someone's listening and there might be analytics that show something different, but I think Baker Mayfield works best with a run game foundation and the play action pass game. Now you can start getting into what personnel should be on the field. Mm-hmm. Personnel is an odd thing because the way teams now use personnel, for instance, you could line up in 12 personnel with 2 tight ends and have a spread formation.
Right.
You can line up in 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers, and they could all be reduced tight to the formation. So, sometimes people like to look at, well, he does well out of 12. And that I think people automatically assume that means, he's got 2 tight ends, so they've got a tight formation. That's not necessarily the case.
Right.
So you have to dig much deeper as opposed to making general statements that, he does better out of 11, he does better out of 12. You truly would have to study formations, receiver locations, and distributions. And, by distribution, you mean how many receivers are on each side, 3x1, 2x2, and location would be what receivers are what, on each side. So that you'd have to study in great detail. But I think Baker is much better off the play action pass game because the reads and throws tend to be much more defined. I think Baker, to me, just from a tape standpoint, is not as good in the drop back pass game. I think he gets a little too unsettled and he starts to play a little too fast. Now, you wouldn't call him mobile, but he can get out of the pocket. But he's not going to make his living in the NFL being a movement outside of structured quarterback. He's had some success at times doing that, but that's not really the keystone, the foundation of his game. He's at his core, he's a pocket quarterback. And you have to get him to play his best from the pocket.
Right. It seemed, and you'll correct me if I'm mistaken on this, Greg, having not studied Kevin Stefanski's offense in as great a detail as I'm sure you've seen him over the past couple of years working with Baker since that became the case. But it seemed in 2020 like they did have that play action pass game with Baker and with that rushing attack. Obviously, they have they've had a good collection of running backs with that team, and the personnel to run the football certainly up front. So, 2021, we know that there were injuries involved, not just for Baker, but for a variety. Jarvis Landry missed a considerable amount of time. Obviously, there's some mitigating factors for why the Browns looked the way that they did in 2021. But with Matt Rule, it would seem that is going to be a similar kind of marriage to kind of get Baker back to what makes the most sense for him.
Yeah, and I think, if memory serves me correctly, Baker was in a lot of 3rd and long situations last year. And I can't remember exactly why, but I think that's true. Okay. And look, no quarterback wants to be in 3rd and long. No team wants to be in 3rd and long because 3rd and long is a drop back passing situation. We've spoken about that regarding Tennessee, that they're not at their best when it's a drop back passing game.
Yeah.
So Look, you hope Christian McCaffrey, if you're a Panthers fan, that is, you hope Christian McCaffrey can stay healthy. They did sign Deontay Foreman, I believe. He is now
That's
their
correct.
second back. And he's, as you know, he certainly looked good last year because he had to play meaningful snaps and get meaningful carries. And I actually thought he looked pretty good. So obviously they felt they wanted a better second back than Hubbard, who they had drafted, I guess, the year prior. And he did not turn out, I guess, as good as they had hoped, which is why they signed Deonta Foreman. So we'll see, but they want to run the ball. I know that that's what Matt Rule would like to do, and I think that fits best with Baker Mayfield's profile as a quarterback. Whether it all works out, only time will tell. But I think that that's the way they will want to play.
It's definitely a more intriguing week one matchup than Sam Darnold and Jacoby Brissett for sure at this point. Now that Baker Mayfield's in the mix, and that, I mean, the defenses in the NFC South, Greg. We got a joke before the podcast started about the Saints, seeing the Saints twice a year. Obviously, that's a stout defense. They've had great personnel throughout the last couple of seasons, and certainly that's going to remain true. Looking at Tampa Bay, there are some adjustments up front, and Ndamukong Suh no longer a part of that defense, but Vita Vea and Jason Pierre-Paul, Shaq Barrett, those are all very, very competent players that have put together a good stretch of football. And I'm not quite certain what Atlanta's going to be. We know that they've been one of the lesser defenses in the league the last couple of years, but I'm sure Dean Pease has what it takes to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, they just had lesser talent. I mean, you watch their tape, and Dean Pease still did a lot of things that you're familiar with in Tennessee, a lot of disguise, a lot of late movement. He just didn't have enough talent to really execute at a high level on a week-to-week basis. So ideally, they're better. I will have to wait and see on that. But I think the Saints defense is really strong. I think Dennis Allen's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. That's been echoed to me by offensive coaches around the league who say that he's very difficult to play against. So, the Saints have quietly, or maybe not so quietly, had a very, very good defense, but everybody has always spoken about their offense. Number one, they had Breeze up until last year, and Sean Payton, who's, always been one of the best offensive minds in the game. So not a lot of people have focused attention on Dennis Allen, who's been the D coordinator, if I'm not mistaken, since 2015 in his second go round with Sean Payton. And Dennis Allen's one of the best there is in the league.
Yeah, and obviously you spent a little time down there earlier this offseason, kind of getting a feel for what the Saints situation is going to look like in 2022. It should be really interesting to see how that plays out. Now, we were going to initially talk for this podcast, Greg, before the news broke, about the University of Tennessee, a couple of prospects.
You can still do that.
Well, we got the time. We're going to make it happen. But yeah, you had been, doing just kind of casually watching some of the players in the SEC. We talked about Bryce Young and Will Levis last week, and you had made mention of Cedric Tillman, the wide receiver at the University of Tennessee, who, I mean, coming into last season, Greg, in his redshirt junior year, he had just 8 career catches. And all of a sudden he turns into this, I don't want to quite call him an unstoppable force over the last 8 games of their season, but it seems like he was really in a position to maximize his skill set. What do you like about the young man?
Yeah, I like Cedric Tillman. I watched a good amount of his tape. He's big. He's physically imposing. Now, in Tennessee's offense, which they don't move people around a ton, he lined up almost exclusively on the outside. There was a lot to like about him. He showed excellent off-the-snap quickness for a big man. He could defeat press coverage without any route disruption. He also showed physicality in defeating press coverage. He played big. He played powerfully. He's a physical kid. And when he had free access off the ball, I thought he was pretty explosive getting into his route stem, breaking down the cushion of corners with speed and stride length. He's a big man, Buck. Mm-hmm. I don't know what we don't have the official numbers. Schools do, but I don't see those until we get to the combine. But I'm sure he'll be in the 6'2" to 6'3" range. He's probably going to weigh in the 212 to 215 range. That's just what he looks like to me on tape. And so he's a big man. And because of that stride length, he played fast. He may not be a 4.38 guy. My guess is he won't be, but he played fast. He had great balance, great body control. He could stop on a dime, which you don't see very often with big receivers like that. and he's very, very competitive. He made a ton of tough catches,
Yeah.
contested catches on the sideline. He caught through contact in the middle of the field. That's a trait you look for, particularly with big receivers, because you want to work them in the middle of the field because of their body type, their frame, and he caught through contact. To me, he has the look and feel of an NFL receiver. I think he could be a boundary X, the single receiver to the short side of the field. We'll see. You know me, I'm not necessarily good at saying where a guy gets drafted,
Sure.
but I would think that if he had a really good year, and I would expect him to put up numbers. We can talk about Hendon Hooker in a sec,
Yeah.
but I would expect him to put up numbers again. Same coaching staff, same offensive coaching staff. I know, same quarterback. He'll put up numbers, and I could easily see him being a top 40 pick in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing, because I know he had explored the possibility of leaving and ultimately made the decision to come back, Greg. And obviously there's going to be ample opportunity for him, not just because of how successful he was last year, but without Bayless Jones Jr. and Javonte Payton leaving this offense, obviously they're going to be looking at a couple of different options at as far as the wide receivers are concerned. But I hated it for him, Greg, just because it took about 5 games for Hendon Hooker to get on the field and for Joe Milton to quit overthrowing Cedric Tillman.
Oh God, yeah,
who could have had so much of a statistically better season, even as impressive as he was. That was a frustration to watch early on in the going for Tennessee.
Yeah, no, I remember. I saw some of those games, and Milton just really badly overthrew probably not only Tillman but a bunch of receivers.
Yeah, that was the case throughout the course of the year, which kind of brings us to the quarterback, because it did take Hendon Hooker some time to get on the field.
Yeah,
Greg, but when he did, that offense obviously is going to make players successful. But it was difficult to argue with the efficiency that Hendon Hooker showed in that offense. I mean, anybody can look at 31 touchdowns and 3 interceptions and say, yeah, that's
pretty good.
Pretty good, right? But as far as his skill set is concerned, Greg, I wonder what you kind of saw from him at the position.
I will say this, my initial, the early viewing of his tape, I did not particularly like it, but he grew on me. Okay. And I ended up watching more than I probably should have, just because, I'm trying to watch, because all this is just, in a sense, preliminary, Buck. I mean, we have another whole season to play when I'll go into more detail after the 2022 season.
But it's good to do the groundwork the way that you do.
Right. But sometimes I watch a guy and I think, oh, I really feel like I should watch a little more. Right. And that's the way I felt about Hooker. Because initially, and I think I mentioned this to you last week, not during the podcast, but I said I didn't like him early on. And the more I watched him, the more I thought he was intriguing.
Yeah.
He's going to be an older quarterback when he's drafted. And I don't know how the league will view that. I think he'll be 24, if I'm not mistaken, when he's drafted, assuming he is drafted. But he's tall, he's athletic, he's got a good arm. He can work the intermediate and deeper levels of the field. He's got mobility to make second reaction plays. He gives an offense the design quarterback run game. He's not an explosive, twitchy runner. He's not sudden. He's not, you don't look at him and go, wow, that's Lamar Jackson, but he's big and he's physical and he's got enough straight line speed that he's a factor as a runner. Mm-hmm. I think that he was an interesting mix of leaving the pocket too early when his primary read wasn't there, because he's really kind of and I don't know enough about that offense to know everything. So I just want to say that. But he was clearly a half field, one read guy at this point. And when that was not there or not clear to him, he broke down and left the pocket a high percentage of the time without really letting anything else happen. Mm-hmm. Even when he was well protected. That's going to have to change if he's going to be an NFL starting quarterback. But because he's a good runner, there were times he did that and then ran for 15 or 20 yards. And I think, quarterbacks that have that ability, that's always a positive early in their career if they get a chance to play, because they can run and make first downs. I thought they were really, really good with first down play action. Obviously, everything's in the gun. But he was really efficient with play action. They did some good things with it. Because of the way they lined up their receivers, Buck, they did a lot of wide splits in 2-by-2 sets.
Mhm.
So he threw a lot of in-breaking routes, because when you're split wide, when you're split, you're only 2 or 3 yards from the sideline. There's no room to run out breaking routes. So you run a lot of in-breaking routes. And that's the kinds of throws he made. But it was all half field stuff. It was predominantly, hey, one read, and if it wasn't there, he took off. But then there were other times where he stood there and took shots and made good throws.
Yeah.
So like I said, he had a really interesting mix of leaving the pocket too early, and then other times standing there and taking shots and making really good throws. So there's something there. It's a piece of clay that needs more molding. We'll have to see what happens in 2022.
Yeah, no, because when we had talked off the air and your assessment, I had to think about, to go kind of back and watch some Hendon Hooker just to kind of refresh my own memory, because we had seen Joe Milton early on, and I think there was such frustration with easy opportunities that he was missing. I was like, I don't recall being, I mean, I know that he was not like a pro prospect, like an obvious pro prospect, talking about Hendon Hooker right out the gate, but I wanted to kind of go back and refresh my memory. And even the coaching staff, Greg, didn't necessarily make the assessment that he should be the starting quarterback. I mean, they didn't. He wasn't the starting quarterback out the gate. So, I mean, it's clear from a couple of different angles that there's something there that can be worked with, but that does not necessarily make itself clear on a consistent basis. But I think, I mean, the question as to how much better he gets, I think and this is, again, we have a full season to play. I think in talking to some scouts about it, the best option would have been for him to consider it this past draft class, because of what we know about the quarterback, the strength or lack thereof of that quarterback class for his best.
You mean to come out this year
to get drafted? Yeah, that was in some discussions.
Yeah, but you know what? Hooker, more than likely, even if he somewhat improves, the nature of that offense is such that he still would have work to do at the NFL level, and he might be better off being a lower pick. Mm-hmm. And when I say lower, I don't mean 6th or 7th round, because those guys sort of start behind the 8 ball. But he might be better off being a 3rd round pick or an early 4th round pick, because it's not likely. And again, I'm just speaking now. Obviously, 2022 could change a lot of things. We know that. But my sense is he would not be considered a guy that would be your guy right from day one. He's not going to be that nuanced, that detailed, that subtle in his approach. And when I say that, I don't mean he's not a hard worker or anything like that. I mean, just in what he's asked to do and how he's required to play the position in the context of that offense. Yeah. He's not going to be Kenny Pickett running a pro offense. So he might be better off in a year where there's better quarterbacks and he falls to the 105th pick in the draft, as opposed to, come out this year and maybe he would have been a higher pick. And then people start thinking, well, this guy should play right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously a much, much different ceiling in terms of a player, but, Malik Willis coming here puts him in a rather ideal situation of kind of be able to learn. Again, not comparing the two players, but the higher you go, the better chance it has to be that you're going to a team that's not necessarily equipped to allow you to, that may need something from you more sooner out of the gate, rather, which is not something that Hendon Hooker, as we sit here today, is necessarily.
Is not likely to be that guy, but he does throw the ball well. He's got good arm talent. He made some good deep throws. The one area he definitely needs to improve as a passer, he tends to throw everything at one speed. So a lot of the shorter routes, he drives the ball with too much velocity. Okay. He's going to have to layer throws, develop a little more touch and pace on certain throws. And you can develop that. That's not something that is not possible to develop. That's practice. And we'll see. But, this will be a very big year for him. Again, and not from a number standpoint. My guess is the nature of that offense in the college game, and you probably study this more than I do, just being an SEC country, is that he'll put up numbers. Yeah. What kind of numbers, we don't know. If he has a great year, could he throw 40 touchdowns? Sure, he could. So you can't just look at the numbers and say, wow, this guy's a great prospect, because that offense will put up numbers.
Right. It's something certainly we don't take for granted, though. There was a lot of bad offense at the University of Tennessee for a long time.
Well, I think they've got, don't they have a good they have a number of O linemen back too, if I'm not mistaken.
They did have Cade Mays went in the NFL draft. I believe he
Right.
might have gone to Carolina, as a matter of
He
fact.
did. He did.
But yeah, they returned the bulk of their offensive line. Jabari Small is somebody who's gonna be an intriguing player to watch out of their backfield, and that running game incorporates a lot of different looks.
Is Jamari Small? What year is he? Could he come out after this year if he has a good year?
I can double check that for you quickly, Greg. I
'Cause backs-
believe
yeah, backs
he's
normally
a
go-
junior. He could come out after the season. Yeah.
Yeah, because backs don't normally stay just because of the carries. You know, they just start to, you don't want to be worn out before you get to the NFL.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pulling up his bio as well.
Yeah, he's coming into his junior season this year, so he can come out.
Yeah, and it's his true junior season. So yeah,
Mhm.
because he did not redshirt. So no, and again, my guess is he only had 141 carries last year. I don't know what their backfield situation is at the University of Tennessee. I would think he might have more carries than 141 this year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment to make. Greg, that was I think Vols fans are really going to enjoy that, and it's always nice to have a little bit of NFL news sprinkled into the pod. Appreciate your time as always.
Yeah,
my
no,
friend.
I enjoyed watching Tillman. He's a guy I'm really looking forward to after this season to see him again because he's an NFL receiver to me. Where he gets drafted, who knows? But he's an NFL receiver.
Now, just to kind of put a bow on it, Greg, I mein, Heupel's offense is obviously something that creates production, but it's not necessarily something that it's one of those. It's just a college offense. I think we've talked about.
Well, what
this.
it does is they work outside a lot,
Right.
which also, by the way, helps Hendon Hooker because there's fewer bodies on the outside. So you don't have to wade through the middle of the field where there's just more bodies.
Yeah.
So it is a college offense, and Tillman work outside for the most part, but he's got really good traits.
Yeah. No, he's going to be a fun watch. Thanks for the time, Greg.
All right, Buck, appreciate it.